What's up, YouTube? In this video, I show you how to replace the EGR cooler on your DD series Detroit motors. That's going to be the 13, 15, and 16 liter. Pictured above is the EGR cooler. Here's a timestamp breakdown, so if you want to skip ahead right to the repair when I start, you can. If you are clueless about the EGR cooler and want to learn before you do it, watch the whole thing. All right, in this video, I'm going to be replacing the EGR cooler. That's this big square thing right here. So I'm going to go over that. This is the new EGR cooler. So let's go over this real quick. You're going to have these caps inside. If you've never seen the inside of an EGR cooler, it's like a honeycomb. It's very hard to describe to someone, but you see all those honeycomb tubes? Exhaust flows through here while coolant runs on the outsides of this. Coolant comes in and out of these as well as here, while exhaust flows through. And as the exhaust flows through, it's cooled by the coolant. Before it goes back, this will be going towards, over here we'll show you. This is the front that I was just pointing at. It goes towards the intake and recirculates. So this is your EGR cooler. Exhaust is coming in and going through. While on the back side is where I took this cap off, what you can't see, the coolant ports, as well as another coolant port. So now we understand what the EGR cooler does and what it looks like. So let's talk about symptoms. Honeycomb tubes may tend to break down after a long time, and you'll get leaks through here, where coolant will then begin to seep into these tubes and into your exhaust. So what's going to happen is you could have coolant leaking into the exhaust, and it could be running down the back of this little 180-degree C tube right here into the back area of the turbo and burning out the exhaust. It would leak down when you shut the engine off, leak down, and when you fire it up, it'll burn out, and that's not good because that could cause downstream problems in your DPF or one box on this DD15 motor, for example. Your 7th injector is right here. You might occasionally see some seepage if it's bad enough. I think I caught mine very early because of oil samples. You might get wetness here around this V-band clamp. You might get some coolant leakage there. Another symptom might be that you're losing coolant but not seeing an external leak, because this will be an internal leak in that EGR cooler. So you'll see it go down, but you won't see an external leak. It'll be internal. With that internal leak going into the exhaust and burning out, on the passenger side, you might smell burning coolant, but you won't be able to tell where it's from. And it won't smell right. It won't smell heavy coolant. It'll smell like a weird exhaust type coolant. There's a different tinge of smell, but those are going to be your symptoms. Loss of coolant, smell of burning coolant, possible seepage and leakage coming out of those points there. So let's go ahead and start the removal process. What's up, YouTube? Sorry for the quick change of scenery here. I'm actually editing this video and I wanted to cut this in. Something you can do to test if you're not sure if your EGR cooler is leaking, but something you can do as a quick test, take you about 10 minutes. Take those two V-band clamps off that 180-degree tube at the back of the EGR cooler. There's the top V-band clamp and the bottom one. Take those off with a 10 millimeter. Just feel in there. If that soot is wet, or if there's any moisture in there, that is a huge indicator that you are leaking, especially if it's on the top. If you took off the top V-band clamp at the back of the EGR cooler and it is wet back there, that's a huge indicator that you are getting coolant coming in, and that would give you a sign that it's your EGR cooler leaking. Before we begin, I picked this EGR cooler up from dpfpartsdirect.com. It was $1,535 shipped directly to the door. Easy customer service. Called up to confirm that this was the correct part. So it comes as a whole unit, brand new, $1,535 for a DD15 or a DD13. And they also send you the gasket little deals that I'll show you once we get this apart. Step number 1, drain your coolant. You should have a drain port on the passenger side at the bottom of the radiator right here. That if it looks the same as mine, that's going to be a 1/16 socket. Loosen that, it'll begin to come out this. There's no reason you can't reuse your coolant. All right, let's get this big intake tube out of the way since the coolant is drained. Undo this clamp right here at the front of the turbo and undo this clamp right here that you can see underneath. I use a flathead because then after undoing those two clamps, there's this sensor down here. Just pop that little gray tab up with your flathead, and the sensor will pull right off, okay? Get that out of the way. On the back side of this plastic intake tube, There is also this tube that you'll need to undo this clamp. This is probably the air feed for your air compressor. So go ahead and take that off. And everything is going to be pretty firm pulling off, depending on how many miles. Might not come out super easy, come off super easy. So just give it a little good, muscling. Just be careful of your air conditioning hoses right here, not to lean on those or break anything like that. Turbos are expensive. Once you have that removed, cover your turbo with something. This is a glove that I'm using just to keep dust and dirt and anything out of there. Cover your turbo. Next, we're going to get these V-band clamps. This is 10 millimeter. So go ahead and run both those out. Now to get these off, you're probably going to need a pry bar because they've been, gone through a lot of heat cycles to break those loose of the V-band. So we'll do that now. So once you pop these V-band clamps loose, see how that goes in there like that? So once you loosen it up enough, you can just pull it out like that, open it up and push it off the V-band. Now this tube is removed, set it to the side. So this is where exhaust comes out of the turbo, goes into the EGR cooler. There's soot, as you can tell. Sometimes you'll be able to see wetness from that, depending on how severe your EGR cooler leak is, and you'll be able to see the wetness in here, which we don't really see much wetness because I think, like I mentioned, I caught this pretty early due to an oil sample showing coolant in my oil. All right, you remove that exhaust tube back there. Next, move up here. This is a banjo bolt. Remove this tube. You're gonna have to undo that clamp. Just pull it right off, set it out of the way. And then also, at the front of the EGR cooler, you're gonna see two clamps. Loosen the one closest to the EGR cooler. Exhaust flows through here back towards the intake. So loosen one of these. That is an 8 millimeter. You probably won't be able to get your screwdriver in there. Also 8 millimeter, and then just zip that off pretty quick. That'll be easier. Now, besides pressure from those other side, the coolant gaskets that we don't see, the only thing holding it on is these 4 bolts right here around these clamps. So that is a 6 millimeter hex bit. And then you just loosen those. Obviously not by hand. Go ahead and we're going to knock these 4 out. And then when you have it fully removed, it's the bolt you're looking at. Clamp comes up. And there's this little plastic spacer holder deal. You can get those out of the way for a little more room. Don't break those. You've got your full 4 bolts out of the bands. You've removed that plastic piece. With a little just bend, these can come out entirely. You can see that there. Comes right out. Okay, you can remove all 4 of these. Okay, we got a pry bar in and we muscled out the EGR cooler. So that's where the coolant goes into the engine. And that's where the exhaust goes through right there. Our EGR cooler is removed. The old gaskets were kind of stuck in here, so I had to use a pry bar and some vice grips. Ended up busting my knuckle to pull those out. So once you got those removed, you definitely want some new ones. Now, unfortunately, at dpfdirect.com, they did send me the wrong size gaskets. So I went to Freightliner and did have to buy new ones. But we are at the point of reinstallation. Reinstallation, set it up there because it's decently heavy. Line up your exhaust clamp hose area as well as the coolant ones. Push that bad boy in. You will have to muscle it, so got to set you down. Assembly is literally everything just in backwards order. Push those new gaskets into the EGR cooler first. Slap the EGR cooler up there and push it against the block as hard as you can. You're then going to use, once you put your little plastic things and your bands back on, put these in with your 6 millimeter hex bit and start tightening them down as much as you can. I then went through one at a time. I would do this one first, then actually I started on the outside too to push that whole piece in as much as possible. Then tighten, 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 tighten. I just freaking piano keyed it back and forth until you get them all the way down there and she's snug and this band is touching this mark. You then reassembly, banjo fitting, coolant flows through here. See that washer right there and right there? There's 2 washers. I do recommend replacing those. I spaced when I was at Freightliner. I should have got a new clamp as well as new hose right there, but that'll be fine, I'm sure. So we're gonna retighten that, move that back up and retighten that. And then we're gonna put our V-band clamps and that hose, the 180 hose right here, the little C. So let's go ahead and do that now. And just a heads up, there are no gaskets on this. So when you put it on, it's just exhaust to EGR cooler, exhaust to exhaust. All right, be sure to always double check your work. Make sure your new banjo bolt is tightened down. Make sure you're re-clamped. Make sure you clamped that front clamp down where the exhaust goes through. Tightened up all 4 of these strap bands. Tightened up your C clamps. Reinstalled the hose that feeds the air compressor. Reinstalled your air filter box hose deal, the big plastic thing. And last but not least, don't forget about that sensor back here, okay? Good to go. While I was in here, I went ahead and reinstalled some new wire loom. New zip ties there, got to protect the wires. Very final step is refilling it with coolant, which I only drained about half the coolant out, about 5 gallons, just because it's in the top level. I didn't film it, but I did have some residual coolant drip down. Hosed that off and cleaned it off, but that is our new EGR cooler. This is what the inside of the factory EGR cooler looks like. A little different fin style versus that honeycomb. It's kind of a grid pattern. So just a heads up when you're looking, this is Detroit OEM. This is the one I took off. All right, all the tools I used on this job. There was a pry bar, some snips for zip ties. You could go without this. Needle nose, flathead, vice grips, just a pair of good pliers. 19. This was for the banjo bolt up top. Ratchet. We have a 8mm for our small clamps. We have a 10mm, and we have a 6. I don't know if it's millimeter, but it's just a 6 on the hex bit for the bolts that went over the straps. An adapter. Might not be necessary for you. So those were the tools we used. Used a little bit of lube to reinstall some of the plastic, make it slide on easier. Optional tool I used was this hook. I could not get this little cup out of the new one. Ended up tearing it up a little bit to yank that out, that protective polyurethane covering. What you should have over is your old EGR, the 2 washers from the banjo bolt that goes on top here of the EGR, and then the 2 old washers from your old EGR that went in here. Optional things that you can replace, but I don't think is necessary, is these V-band clamps. You can replace those while you're there. And this exhaust clamp. I actually would recommend replacing this. I'm kind of disappointed I did not grab a new one from Freightliner when I was up there. This clamp, and this band, this fitting. Refilling our coolant, I highly recommend from Harbor Freight for like 15 bucks, one of these electric pumps. It does fluids really well, like coolant. It will not push oil though, just a heads up, just coolant. After she's filled up with coolant, double check your work. Put your hand over here, make sure there's no exhaust leaks coming out by those V-band clamps. You might need to readjust and settle that up. Check underneath where those gaskets were, make sure no coolant is going out, and then also be very careful of the fan spinning up front, but put your hand up by that rubber gasket up front and make sure there's no exhaust coming out there. Job's done. Congratulations, you successfully replaced your EGR cooler. Stay loaded.